I think that's part of the reason that General Odierno is expressing his concern. First of all, the United States and the UK work very closely when our mutual national interests are at stake, and we've learned through the years to depend on one another, to be quite frank about it, and certainly Iraq and Afghanistan were testimony to that. So I think what General Odierno is speaking about, to the heart of this issue, is a 20% cut in ground forces from 102,000 to 82,000 is a pretty steep cut for a force that's already relatively small in size. That is the 102,000. And, you know, I think what happens here, the budget cutters and the civilian servants who are overseeing this, because we deal with this in the United States, they have a tendency to rely on technology as the compensating factor. In other words, precision-guided munitions, air power, aircraft carriers, submarines, etc. And they get an immediate return by cutting people, because human resources gets you a return in the next budget, whereas cutting back on capital investment does not. It's a much longer-term, slower process to get a return. So we take these risks. But here's the reality. The reality is, look at the global jihad that's taking place in the world. Radical Islamists. They have no air power, no sea power. They are essentially a ground force with some degree of technology. And to defeat this movement, as it's going to be a generational thing for years to come, requires ground forces. Putin is redesigning Europe. Certainly he has a different political order in mind than what the West has, to be sure, and certainly NATO. And he's threatening, obviously, by beginning this campaign in Georgia first, Crimea second, and Ukraine third. And who knows what's next, whether it's Estonia and the Baltics. When he sees the cutback in defense spending for the UK and also other Europeans, I think he looks at that as a lack of political will. And I think it encourages this adventurism on his part. And then from very practical terms, we need ground forces, because ground forces is a significant deterrence, boots on the ground. I'm not talking about just fighting, but as a deterrence again. I'm not minimizing the importance of ships and airplanes, but I am saying ground forces usually take the steepest cuts, and we've learned through history that it's the wrong thing to do.
Okay, well, according to our Prime Minister, you know, we have still one of the highest defence budgets around, even with the estimated cuts in the years ahead. So what are we talking about here? The fact that perhaps the budget isn't being spent in the right areas and we should be ring-fencing ground forces? Or is it a case that perhaps other priorities should go and we spend more, ultimately, in total on defence?
Well, I think a little bit of both. Given the threats that we're facing in the world, I know from the U.S. defense budget, we've gone beyond cutting to the point of efficiency. We've gone to the point where it's actually reckless, returning U.S. ground forces, if your audience understand this, to pre-World War II. And air power to the 1950s, when the Air Force was born in the American military. So we know we're taking too much cuts. I can't get in the middle of your budget and make judgments about that. I do know that the ground force cuts are too much, and we historically pay a price for that. You know, you have senior sergeants there who got 15, 18 years of service. They go out of service. We can't hire that person back. There's no experience out there where we, like the civilian world does, and hires a 35-year-old sergeant who is experienced. We have to grow that sergeant. It takes 15 to 16 years. So the same thing with battalion commanders. You know, they're in their late 30s. It took us 18 years to get them to that position. And we can't hire that person. We have to grow and develop those officers. So personnel cuts on ground forces has huge impact in fighting future wars effectively, and also providing the kind of deterrence that we should have.
General Jack Keane, thank you so much for joining us here on Sky News Tonight. Thank you.